They locked the door, lowered their voices, thought secrecy could protect them. Funny thing about secrets, they get heavier when the truth starts breathing. This wasn't a meeting, it was a reckoning. Names were dropped, fingers trembled, smiles cracked. Because every excuse they rehearsed collapsed the moment reality walked in wearing your shadow. They tried to rewrite the story, but facts don't flinch. Every lie circled back. Every scheme exposed the fear underneath. Not fear of losing power. Fear of admitting they were wrong about you. Tears don't fall because of sadness alone. They fall when denial finally dies. You weren't in the room, yet you owned it. Your growth forced them to confront something unbearable. You didn't break like they expected. You evolved, and the brutal truth they ran from. You were never the problem. You were the proof. They thought a locked door could keep reality out. That if they whispered softly enough, the truth wouldn't hear its own name. Papers shuffled, phones silenced, nervous laughter filling the gaps where confidence used to live. Plans stacked on plans, all built on the same rotten foundation. Control the narrative, bend the facts, erase you from the equation. Funny how truth doesn't need an invitation. It seeps through walls, crawls under doors, sits quietly until everyone notices it's already there. Every strategy they laid out depended on one fragile assumption: that you'd stay predictable, that you'd react the way they needed you to. That pressure would shrink you, silence would weaken you, and doubt would finish the job. But the moment they realized you didn't follow the script, the room changed. Suddenly, the timelines didn't line up. The excuses contradicted each other. Someone noticed the numbers didn't add up. Someone else asked a question that shouldn't have been asked. Silence got louder than the talking. You see, secrets are only powerful when everyone agrees to protect them. The second self-preservation enters the room, loyalty evaporates. One person starts distancing themselves. Another subtly shifts blame. That wasn't my idea. You said it would work. I warned you. The plan begins to cannibalize itself. Fear sharpens memories. Every promise they made to each other starts sounding like a trap. And right there, in that uncomfortable pause, the truth stretches and yawns. They weren't exposed by you. They were exposed by reality, refusing to cooperate. Because no matter how many angles they discussed, no matter how many outcomes they tried to predict, they couldn't erase the evidence of your growth. They couldn't explain why you were still standing. Why influence slipped through their fingers. Why people listened to you instead. Facts are cruel like that. They don't care how much effort went into the lie. One by one, their confidence cracked. The plan needed unity, but fear breeds selfishness. Someone suggested cutting losses. Someone suggested sacrifice. Someone suggested silence. And someone, somewhere in that room, realized the brutal part. The plan didn't fail because it was poorly designed. It failed because it was built against the truth. And the truth has this nasty habit of collapsing everything that pretends it doesn't exist. Their secret meeting turned into a mirror. Every flaw stared back at them. The manipulation, the underestimation, the arrogance. They weren't afraid of consequences. They were afraid of accountability. Afraid that admitting failure meant admitting you were never weak. Afraid that acknowledging the collapse meant facing how wrong they had been from the start. You became the variable they couldn't eliminate, the proof that control is an illusion when it's fueled by denial. So the whispers turned shaky. The room felt smaller. The plans stopped sounding clever and started sounding desperate. Because once the truth enters, secrecy doesn't protect you anymore. It traps you with it. Fear has a smell. You can't hide it, even when you perfume the room with confidence and rehearsed laughter. Behind closed doors, it crept out anyway, through clenched jaws, tapping fingers, eyes that refused to meet each other. They weren't calm. They were performing calm. Big difference. Because when fear shows up, it doesn't announce itself loudly. It tightens the air, makes every word feel risky, makes every pause feel dangerous. They weren't scared of exposure at first. They were scared of losing control. Control over the story. Control over perception. Control over how things were supposed to go. Fear started whispering the moment they realized you didn't react the way they expected. No meltdown. No retreat. No apology. That's when the masks began slipping. When the smiles froze just a second too long. When jokes landed flat. When someone asked, "What if they know?" and nobody answered. Fear loves isolation, so it turned them against each other. Suddenly, trust felt expensive. Every suggestion sounded like a setup. Every plan felt like a gamble. They started watching who spoke first, who stayed quiet, who avoided blame. Fear rewrites priorities. Loyalty becomes optional. Survival becomes personal. The room filled with half-statements and cautious language. Everyone trying to sound reasonable, while protecting themselves from the fallout they could feel approaching. What terrified them wasn't what you did. It was what you didn't do. You didn't beg. You didn't explain. You didn't chase approval. Silence, when it's backed by strength, is unsettling. It leaves space for imagination, and fear fills that space with worst-case scenarios. They projected their own tactics onto you, assuming you were plotting the way they would. Fear always assumes others are as manipulative as itself. Their voices softened, not out of respect, but out of panic. Fear stripped away bravado and left raw instinct behind. Someone suggested patience. Someone suggested distraction. Someone suggested pretending nothing happened. All fear-driven moves, because fear hates direct confrontation with truth. It prefers delay, confusion, noise, anything that buys time, anything that avoids admitting the obvious, that you were no longer beneath them. And the cruel part, fear made them honest without meaning to. Cracks appeared in their stories. Contradictions slipped out. The more they tried to manage fear, the more it exposed what they were hiding. Fear doesn't just paralyze, it reveals. It shows who needs power to feel safe, who depends on others staying small, who collapses when dominance stops working. They weren't afraid of you personally. They were afraid of what you represented. Change. Exposure. The end of an old hierarchy that benefited them. Fear sharpened every realization they tried to suppress, that their influence was fading, that their authority was fragile, that the room no longer belonged to them the way it used to. Fear doesn't scream when it wins. It sits quietly, forcing people to confront truths they spent years avoiding. Regret doesn't arrive loudly. It sneaks in after confidence leaves. After the bravado drains out of the room and everyone is left staring at the mess they created. At first, they told themselves it was a misunderstanding, then a timing issue, then bad luck. Anything except the truth, because the truth is heavy, and regret hates carrying weight it can't deny. They replayed moments they once laughed about, little decisions that felt harmless at the time, comments made casually, assumptions stated as facts. They had convinced themselves they knew you. Had you categorized, labeled, reduced to something manageable. That's the trick of arrogance. It feels like intelligence until reality checks the math. And when it does, regret sharpens its claws. Someone finally said it out loud, not boldly, not proudly, but carefully, like touching a bruise. Maybe we were wrong. That's when the room shifted. Because regret doesn't just admit mistakes, it rewinds them. Suddenly they remembered the warnings they ignored, the moments they underestimated your patience, the times they mistook silence for weakness. Regret forces memory to become honest. They saw how every move meant to corner you actually boxed them in. Every attempt to diminish you elevated you instead. Influence doesn't vanish overnight, it transfers. And regret is the realization that they signed it over themselves. They didn't lose ground because you attacked. They lost it because they miscalculated who you were becoming. What made it worse was knowing it was preventable. That's the poison in regret. If you had failed, they could have justified everything. If you had reacted emotionally, they could have blamed instability. But you didn't. You stayed composed. You adapted. You let time do the work. Regret hates discipline because discipline exposes impatience for what it is. They tried to rationalize it. Anyone could have made that mistake. We didn't have all the information. But regret doesn't care about excuses. It measures outcomes. And the outcome was clear. You were no longer reachable from the position they assumed you'd stay in. The hierarchy they relied on cracked. And regret highlighted every step where they could have chosen differently. You became the reminder they couldn't silence. Not by speaking, but by existing beyond their reach. Regret lingered in the realization that their tactics only worked on people who needed validation. You didn't. You needed progress. And that difference cost them more than they were ready to admit. They felt it when your name came up and nobody mocked it anymore. When skepticism turned into hesitation. When dismissal turned into uncomfortable respect. Regret showed up in the pauses before speaking, in the cautious tone, in the avoidance. Because regret knows when a door has closed, and it knows when it was the one who slammed it shut. They weren't grieving you. They were grieving the version of the future where they stayed ahead, where you remained an afterthought. Regret stripped away the fantasy and left them staring at a truth they couldn't undo. Misjudging you wasn't just an error, it was the turning point. Your rise didn't announce itself with noise. It crept in quietly, the way inevitability always does. While they were busy watching each other, measuring egos, protecting territory, something shifted outside their view. Influence moved. Attention followed. And by the time they noticed, it was already too late to pretend nothing had changed. Power hates being surprised, and you surprised it by not asking permission. They searched for a reason to dismiss it. Luck, timing, someone else pulling strings. Anything that would keep them from saying your name with weight behind it. But patterns don't lie. Momentum doesn't lie. People don't follow accidents for long. Your consistency made denial uncomfortable. Every attempt to downplay your progress only highlighted it more. Silence from you spoke louder than their commentary ever could. What made your rise undeniable wasn't dominance in the obvious sense. It was stability. You didn't rush. You didn't overreact. You didn't need applause to keep moving. That kind of composure unsettles people who rely on chaos to feel important. They couldn't provoke you into mistakes, couldn't bait you into reactions. And without reactions, their tactics lost purpose. They felt it in the shift of conversations. Decisions started happening without them. Opinions changed before they entered the room. Authority doesn't disappear dramatically, it erodes. One ignored suggestion at a time, one delayed response at a time. Meanwhile, your presence carried weight, even when you weren't present. That's the kind of rise no meeting can stop. They started studying you, not openly, but with the quiet desperation of people trying to catch up. Not to learn, but to find a flaw. Something to exploit. Something to remind themselves they were still above you. But all they found was discipline, boundaries, focus, the things they had once mocked because they required patience. Your rise forced comparison, and comparison is cruel. It exposed how much energy they wasted maintaining appearances instead of building substance. While they guarded titles, you built leverage. While they chased control, you built influence. And influence doesn't need permission to operate. They tried to redefine success to exclude you. Changed metrics, shifted standards. But reality doesn't bend to convenience. When results speak consistently, denial sounds childish. Your name began to surface in rooms you'd never stepped into. Not as a threat, but as a reference point. As a standard. And that's when it settled in. Your rise wasn't temporary. It wasn't emotional. It wasn't reactionary. It was structural. Built on habits, not moments. On clarity, not noise. You didn't take their place. You made their position irrelevant.